You've got a real treat coming today. I've got notes in front of me about my dear friend Jeff Ziegler, who's the academic division leader. He's the academic dean at Thomas Jefferson, but he would tell you first and foremost, he is a teacher. And I think that's what Jeff was meant to be. He's been the editor-in-chief of a publishing house. He graduated from Princeton and has many other degrees. But in my humble opinion, Jeff Ziegler is the most intellectual person I've ever met. I think that if you will do yourself the favor, certainly not Jeff, you will be a better person by what you hear today. Jeff Ziegler puts his mind and soul into the addresses he gives every year. And if you will give him your full attention, you'll be a better person in just a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Jeff Ziegler.
Last month, an hour or so after Mr. Helton invited me to give this talk, my 11-year-old daughter asked me whether we could watch the Friday evening news together. We turned on the NewsHour and watched a segment about Puerto Rico's debt of $72 billion, approximately $20,300 per citizen. I realized how ignorant I was and am about Puerto Rico, and so I started to read about it. Christopher Columbus came to the island during his second American voyage and named it San Juan Bautista, or St. John the Baptist. Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony for over 4 centuries until 1898, the year of the Spanish-American War. Puerto Rico is the size of Connecticut, and it also has as many people as Connecticut does, about 3.5 million. Questionable decisions during years of U.S. territorial rule almost brought the island to the brink of starvation in the mid-1900s. Today, Puerto Rico is not a territory, but a commonwealth. Its official animal is a frog. Its bird is the woodpecker. Its flower is the hibiscus, and its capital is San Juan. Its motto is Ioannes est nomen eius, John is his name, a reference to a verse in the Gospel according to Luke on the birth of John the Baptist, a birth that many residents of Puerto Rico celebrate with festivity every June the 24th, which was yesterday. The reference to John the Baptist is fortuitous, for I come before you not as some sort of expert, but as a fellow teacher, a mediocre teacher who wants to become less mediocre over the summer, a teacher who knows he needs to change in some ways and who looks to others for inspiration. Over the years, I've been inspired by the work of so many in this room, teachers, board members, and administrators alike, who have borne the burden of the heat of the day in difficult circumstances. How grateful I am to the fellow members of the academic division, Linda Bevilacqua, Tony Best, Jennifer Perdue, and Tara Gustin, for whom I have such respect and from whom I have learned so very much over the years. How grateful I am to Team CFA board members and staff, including Mr. Maimoni and Mr. Helton, who have done so much over the years to help me improve in my work as a teacher and administrator. How grateful I am to Mr. John Bryan, Team CFA's founder, and his family, without whose exceptional generosity we would not be gathered here today. How blessed we all are to be part of a network where we can turn to one another and learn from one another. John is his name. There is so much we can learn from John the Baptist, an austere man who was not interested in personal comfort, a humble man who said, "He must increase, but I must decrease," a clear voice who called upon the men and women of his time to change, a man of principle who did not blow with the wind, a man of courage who accepted suffering and death rather than call evil good. John is his name. In my own work as a teacher and administrator, I have found inspiration in the lives of several persons named John. Let me tell you about three of them. Jean-Baptiste de La Salle was born in 1651, 8 years after Louis XIV assumed the throne of France. Under Louis XIV, absolute monarchy reached its zenith, but however glorious Versailles may have been, most Frenchmen suffered deep poverty as a vast central bureaucracy developed and war upon war was fought. Jean-Baptiste was born into wealth in Reims, an old textile town that was fast becoming the center of the champagne industry. He sensed a call to the ministry, and by the age of 27, he was a prominent and respected clergyman at the historic Reims Cathedral, one of the masterpieces of Gothic architecture. And then he received a message that changed his life. A relative who had moved away and been widowed said she wanted to pay for the startup of a free elementary school in her hometown for the needy, and she had found an administrator for the school. Would you please help him out? Jean-Baptiste said yes, helped the administrator start the school, and went back to focusing on his duties at the cathedral. And then Jean-Baptiste received another knock at the door. A different wealthy widow wanted to pay for the construction of a free school for the poor in another neighborhood of Reims, but only on condition Jean-Baptiste was involved. Again, he said yes, helped start a second free school, entrusted it to the same administrator, and went back to focusing on his duties at the cathedral. There was a problem, though. The administrator of both these schools wasn't the best administrator, and the schools were beginning to fail. Jean-Baptiste then received another knock, a knock at the door of his heart. Jean-Baptiste could have been indifferent to the plight of the teachers and the students, but he did not turn his back on the schools he had helped found. He started visiting the schools every day. He befriended the teachers. He offered them some friendly advice, and he supplemented their meager salaries with his own inherited wealth. The education of the needy continued to tug at his heart. At the age of 32, he decided to burn his ships, as it were. He resigned from his comfortable position, gave away every franc he owned, and devoted himself entirely to education. His friends and relatives were appalled. Jean-Baptiste de La Salle spent the remaining years of his life developing a network of free schools for the needy, and he suffered much during those years. Over the last 36 years of his life, his network of free elementary schools grew to 27 schools with 9,000 students and 274 teachers who had committed their lives to teaching. Jean-Baptiste suffered from rheumatism, grew weak, and died exhausted, but joyful and grateful in 1719, 5 years after the death of Louis XIV. Jean-Baptiste was just shy of his 68th birthday. Jean-Baptiste was an organizer, a leader, but he was also an innovator, a pioneer. In the France of his day, children were taught how to read in Latin before they were taught how to read in French, even though Latin had long ceased to be the spoken language of the home. Jean-Baptiste shook things up and taught poor children how to read in French using phonics before he taught them how to read in Latin. He created a culture of discipline and accountability, requiring students to be silent and listen to teachers as they spoke, and requiring teachers to correct young readers every time they mispronounced a word. Jean-Baptiste also grouped students by ability level rather than by age level, and instituted the practice of using common textbooks based on ability level. Educating poor children was Jean-Baptiste's primary focus, but not his only focus. To help prepare older students for college, he opened up a boarding school. To help prepare his teachers for the classroom, he opened something like a teacher's college, the first of its kind. Jean-Baptiste wanted his teachers to maintain discipline, but he also wanted them to be kind-hearted. To deal with young people very harshly is to forego all hope of bringing about any good, he wrote. Preach by example and practice before the eyes of the young what you wish them to accept. Inspire and lead others by encouraging them, he said another time. Take care not to let yourself be carried away by impatience in class. One phrase of his is particularly haunting. Are the persons entrusted to you so dear to you, he said, that you are ready to give your life? John is his name. A century after Jean-Baptiste's death, John Henry Newman came of age at Oxford. John Henry, born in 1801, came from the upper middle class. His father was a banker. John Henry was exceptionally bright. He was also earnest, hardworking, conscientious, considerate, and at times melancholic. And through his speaking and writing, he exercised a deep influence on Oxford until the middle of his life, when his decision to leave the Anglican faith compelled him to leave the then Anglican University. John Henry Newman was a man of many gifts. James Joyce, the great Irish novelist and short story writer, called Newman the greatest of English prose writers, and Edward Elgar of Pomp and Circumstance fame set to music Newman's haunting poem, Dream of Gerontius, on a soul's final moments before death. John Henry's Apologia Pro Vita Sua was one of the most important autobiographies of his century. His Grammar of Assent merits a place in the history of philosophy, and his essay on the development of Christian doctrine is a masterpiece of theology. I take special inspiration, though, from John Henry Newman's educational writings, especially the idea of a university. John Henry was an Englishman who was asked to found a university in Ireland in 1852, the last year of the Great Famine that had killed 1 million people. And in the idea of a university, Newman set forth his views on education with exceptional eloquence. John Henry Newman saw education as symphonic, with each discipline complementing all the others, as we all strive for a deeper knowledge of the truth of things. When I moved to North Carolina over a dozen years ago, I was surprised to see that a few times a year, wild turkeys would make their appearance in my front yard. Breathing Newman's intellectual air, we might say that using grammar, we name the turkeys, using logic, we think about them, and using rhetoric, we speak about them with eloquence. Arithmetic counts the turkeys, geometry ponders their shapes, and music considers the sounds that they make. The biologist, the chemist, the physicist, the philosopher, the historian, the sculptor, the painter, the poet, the theologian, each has something to say about the turkey. In addition to this symphonic view of knowledge, John Henry had a great gift for something that has perhaps fallen by the wayside in our day. He had a gift for friendship. His motto was cor ad cor loquitur, Latin for heart speaks to heart. Accordingly, he emphasized the importance of the personal influence that teachers have upon students. As a 31-year-old tutor at Oxford, Newman made the fascinating claim that truth has not been upheld in the world as a system, not by books, not by argument, not by temporal power, but by the personal influence of such men as are at once the teachers and the patterns of it. 2 decades later, when he was in Ireland, he described education as essentially oral instruction of present communication between man and man, of the personal influence of a master. Because Newman saw students not as numbers, but as unique, unrepeatable persons with immense dignity, he saw a university, and by extension any school, not as an institution, an object, a thing, but as an alma mater, a beloved mother. A university, he wrote, is according to the usual designation, an alma mater, knowing her children one by one, not a foundry or a mint or a treadmill. Several months ago, Mr. Helton and I had the privilege of spending the day with charter school leaders from across the nation. The co-founder of one charter school network made an offhand remark that has remained in my mind. He said something like, we see our students as souls or as having souls, something like that. And that profoundly shapes all that we do. What if we, like Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, like John Henry Newman, saw our students not as problems to be solved, though problems there can be, nor as messes to be controlled, though there can be messes, but as persons with souls, as persons to be loved? It would change the way we teach. We would want to set the bar very high so that each student could flourish. We would strive to help teachers reach that high bar, lest the students fall. We would strive to help students reach that high bar, lest they fall prey to discouragement. And we would never use that bar to beat the students down. What if we saw our students as persons to be loved, one by one? It would change the way we administer our schools. We would help our teachers keep that bar very high and strive to help students reach that high bar. And it would bother us greatly if teachers did not keep the bar high or use the high bar to beat the students down. 2 months ago, I represented Team CFA at a job fair sponsored by the Education Department of a university in North Carolina. A job candidate, the leading candidate it turned out that day, came up to my table, said she was completing her student teaching in 4th grade, and told me that her ideal teaching position would be in 4th grade science. On my laptop, I showed her the core knowledge sequence in 4th grade science. The topics include the circulatory system, atoms, electricity, geology, and meteorology, among other topics. The candidate seemed shocked, even aghast, and said something like, "How can 4th graders possibly learn things that are that difficult?" What damage, what great damage is inflicted on a child, on a community, on a nation, when a teacher, 100 teachers, 1,000 teachers think that 9-year-olds don't have the intellectual wherewithal to learn about arteries, veins, and capillaries, when a teacher sets the bar so very low. John is his name. We are gathered here because of the generosity of a self-described country boy from Livingston, Montana, who has had a quiet but profound influence upon education in the United States for the past 3 decades, through his support of the charter school movement and the Core Knowledge Foundation from their inception, and through his founding of the Challenge Foundation and of Team CFA, of which we are all blessed to be a part. I should like to pay tribute to 3 aspects of Mr. Bryan's influence on education: his commitment to parental choice, his enduring support of E.D. Hirsch's curricular vision, and his deep desire to educate American citizens. Mr. Bryan lives in Oregon, and in 1922, the state of Oregon passed the Compulsory Education Act, which banned private schools, banned home instruction, and required all students to attend public schools. A religious school and a military academy filed suit, and in 1925, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously struck down the Oregon law. In Pierce v. Society of Sisters, perhaps one of the Supreme Court's finest hours, the court ruled that the fundamental theory of liberty upon which all governments in this union repose excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with a high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. The child is not the mere creature of the state. The court recognized that every child by nature is the daughter or son, not of the state of Oregon, but of a father and a mother who have the fundamental human right to make choices with regard to how best to educate their children. As partial as we may be to public charter schools, we are called upon, as a matter of principled commitment to human rights, to be ardent advocates of parental choice in education, even when that choice is not a public charter school. And because parents have chosen to entrust their children to our instruction for a time, we teachers, I think, are called to communicate frequently and transparently with parents and guardians, sharing the good news about their children, which I, for one, too often fail to do, as well as the bad news. From the beginning, Mr. Bryan and his family have been strong supporters of the core knowledge sequence, which is predicated on the notion that for the sake of academic excellence, greater fairness, and higher literacy, there should be a core curriculum that is coherent, cumulative, and content-specific in order to help children establish strong foundations of knowledge, grade by grade, kindergarten through grade 8. Individual schools and individual teachers may certainly implement the sequence in different ways, but at the end of the day, every kindergartner in our network should be able to recognize Winslow Homer's Snap the Whip, and every fourth grader in our network should be able to tell us about the murder of Thomas Becket, and every eighth grader in our network should be able to tell us about the chemist Dorothy Hodgkin. Summer is a great time for all of us, teachers and administrators and board members alike, to go to Google and type in the phrase download core knowledge sequence, open up the PDF, and see what may inadvertently be falling through the cracks in our classrooms, in our schools. This commitment to parental choice in education, this commitment to the core knowledge sequence, is part of a heartfelt desire on Mr. Bryan's part to educate American citizens. In the first of his two founders' letters, Mr. Bryan spoke of Team CFA's quest to carry out its mission of educating kids in the United States to be productive American citizens. In his second founders' letter, Mr. Bryan spoke of the need for a content-rich core curriculum that produces interested, knowledgeable, and productive American citizens. Perhaps there is no better time than the summer of an election year to reacquaint ourselves with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and other great texts of American history that are part of the sequence, such as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, and to impart what we have learned to our students. John is his name. That phrase is the motto of Puerto Rico, whose debt of $20,300 per citizen has been in the news in recent months. Our national debt as of last Friday, June 17th, was $19,248,244,178,321.02, nearly $8 trillion more than when Team CFA held its first annual conference in Denver in 2009. Our national debt stands at roughly $60,358 per American. Even if the federal deficit were to disappear magically tomorrow, those 100 students I teach every day must collectively pay back over $6 million plus interest over the course of their lives because of the choices that our lawmakers have made up to this point. But my 100 students, sadly, will likely have to pay back far more than that collective $6 million. For year after year, our lawmakers keep adding to their burden. I am not an economist, nor can I foresee the future. But with a burden so heavy, with a burden that grows ever heavier by the day, is it not plausible that funding for education will begin to run dry, and that we will need to teach 35 or 40 students in a classroom, as Jean-Baptiste de La Salle and his band of teachers did? Is it not plausible that in the symphony of knowledge, teachers will need to be able to play more than one instrument and teach literature and history at once, or math and science at once? Is it not plausible that the stream of money will no longer flow for ebooks and other textbooks? I cannot foretell the future, but there are few educators better poised to adjust to change and to austerity than we in Team CFA. One of the glories of the core knowledge sequence is that so often the history teacher and the English teacher and the art teacher are all playing the same melody at the same time, together engaging the same period in human history. And one of the glories of Team CFA is its educational technology division, as we saw this morning in Peter Rowe's magnificent talk. If we simply keep an open mind to what we can learn from him and his team, it could become easier for us to welcome more students into our classrooms. If we draw from the division's Team CFA Resources website and other resources, we can develop a greater independence in our teaching and break free of the shackles one day of needlessly expensive textbooks. And if we recall the overarching purpose of educating American citizens, then we will help keep alive in human history the idea, so precious and so rare, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. John is his name. At the age of 28, John Henry Newman, amid deep inner suffering, wrote a poem that began, "Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home, lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet, I do not ask to see the distant scene, one step enough for me. One step enough for me. What one step can you take, can I take, to better serve the souls entrusted to our care? What knocks at the door of our hearts? What step can I take to learn more about my subject, to maintain better discipline in my classroom, to see each student as a person with immense dignity, the son or a daughter of a father and a mother? What step can I take to ensure that the core knowledge sequence is truly my school's K-8 curriculum, that each teacher in my school is setting the bar very high, that my school is not a foundry or a mint or a treadmill, but an alma mater, knowing her children one by one? But we teachers are tempted to say, I am too busy, I am too tired to take that step. But we administrators are tempted to say, I'm afraid to take that step. And from across the ocean sea, from across the centuries, a man named John, worn out by exhaustion but full of joy, looks upon us with understanding and smiles upon us with kindness and says to us in reply, are the persons entrusted to you so dear to you that you are ready to give your life? Thank you.